This program in the series will provide a brief explanation of all the adjustments that can be made on the GS series pin setter, including the GS92, GS96, and GS98 pin setters. Before any adjustments are made, please review the safety procedures at the beginning of program number 1. Also, read the instructions in the manual carefully before beginning any adjustments. Before making any adjustments on a universal electronic system, turn off both the lane power switches on the left and right high voltage boxes. If you fail to do this, you or someone else may be seriously injured. On a consolidated electronic system, turn both stop-run switches on the top of the low voltage box to the stop position. The low voltage box is located on the front of the left pin setter. Once again, failure to do this may result in serious injury to you or someone else. The ball detector uses 3 adjustable spring-loaded screws to adjust the transmitter and receiver. This unit projects an infrared beam across the lane to a retroreflector on the opposite side. The beam is then reflected back to the receiver. When the beam is not being reflected, the red LED on the ball detector is turned on. This indicates that there is an object blocking the beam or there is an alignment problem. If there is no apparent blockage of the beam, then follow the alignment procedures in the manual. The transport band must be centered on the front and rear rollers and adjusted for proper tension. Refer to your service manual for this adjustment. The V-belt tensioner must be hand-tightened as tight as possible. Then add 1 complete turn with a 17mm wrench. Also, check the transport bands and elevator's drive belt tension and make sure that they are the proper lengths. Please refer to your manual for a detailed explanation of these adjustments. The ball cushion must be adjusted so that the bottom edge is 10 to 15 millimeters in front of the ball protector ring and has 5 millimeters of side clearance. Proper adjustment of the ball cushion shock absorber is necessary to stop the ball properly and to prevent damage to the shock absorber itself. Adjust the ball door so it is centered in the ball door protector ring. There are 3 collars on the ball door shaft that should be adjusted as follows. The lower collar is adjusted to provide a 1 millimeter gap between the shaft's upper hitch pin and the ball accelerator frame. The middle collar should be raised or lowered to center the ball door in the protector ring. The distance between both A points and both B points should be equal. The upper collar needs to have a 1 millimeter gap between the door and the collar. The ball door lock allows the ball door to open only when the ball door solenoid is not energized. This is done when a ball presses the ball door key and clears the locking bolt by 5 millimeters. This is adjusted with 2 hex head screws that mount the locking bolt solenoid assembly onto the ball accelerator frame. The ball accelerator flat belt guard should be adjusted to operate properly. A vertical distance of 10 millimeters between the bottom of the guard and a ball riding on the ball track should be obtained. Under proper tension, the ball accelerator flat belt tension spring should measure 194 millimeters from center to center. Make this adjustment by tightening or loosening the 2 nuts that secure the long tension bar to the rear of the accelerator frame. Using the 3 adjustment points on the pin feed deflector, obtain a 6 millimeter clearance between the transport band and the deflectors. The elevator's shovel cam can be adjusted by rotating the elevator's pin shovels so the lower surface of a pin shovel is 22 millimeters above the surface of the pin turn wedges. Then, loosen the attaching hardware and position the center line of the shovel cam on the center of the pin shovel's guide roller. Hand tighten the elevator drive belt tensioner. Then, with a 17mm wrench, tighten the adjusting nut an additional complete turn, 360 degrees. The pin count switch must be adjusted to make sure that all pins leaving the elevator are counted. This ensures that the distributor is loaded as efficiently as possible. To position the original style switch, an imaginary line is drawn between the tips of the deflector wings on the pin guide assembly. Position the switch so that its actuator is 35mm away from this line. Then, adjust the actuator height so that it is 75 to 80mm above the top of the wedge. The bottom of the actuator on this version of the pin count switch only needs to be positioned 20mm away from the imaginary line and 70 to 75mm above the top of the wedge. Please refer to the service manual for further details. The shark drive gear and spur gear must mesh properly to carry the pins from the elevator to the distributor. To adjust for proper gap, loosen the mounting hardware for the shark switch mounting plate and position the gear to get a 1 to 3mm tooth gap and retighten the hardware. To assure proper placement of the pins into the shark switch assembly, you must make sure that the upper rear corner of each pin turn wedge is 135mm from the rear of the elevator plate. To do this, simply loosen the pin turn wedge mounting hardware and position the wedge to 135mm, then retighten the hardware. Adjust the pin overflow socks so that the openings face each other. This will prevent excessive wear on the pins and transport band. For proper pin loading to occur, the setting table must be level. To do this, lower the table to the pin setting position. Measure the height of the table at the 1, 7, and 10 pin cutouts. If there is more than 3mm difference between each, then refer to the manual for adjustment instructions. The setting table must be adjusted in the at-home position. This is to assure that the table reaches the proper position for the A, B, C, and D switches at the correct time. This also allows the pins to be loaded into the pin holders no matter which direction the motor turned last. Note that the table must always stop at the same height when the A switch is activated. An adjustment is necessary if the relationship of the chain and crank arm are not equal when checking angle A and angle B. After angle A and angle B are equal, the table's height can be adjusted if necessary. There are two places that require proper adjustment of the table height to ensure the correct operation of the pin setter table. The first is when the table is in its highest position. The grippers on the pin holders should be parallel to the inside corner of the pin release lever. The second place to check adjustment is when the table is in its lowest position. When the table is lowered fully to set new pins, there should be 15mm plus or minus 5mm between the lane surface and the bottom of the table. Please reference the service manual for the proper procedure. With the setting table in its correct home position, the pin release adjustment is done by measuring the clearance between the inside corner of the pin release lever and the closed gripper. There should be approximately 7mm between the release lever and the gripper. Non-universal pin stations have a two-piece release lever. To adjust, loosen, and then position the center metal brackets so that the lever is at the correct distance. On universal pin stations, the adjustment is made by moving the individual pin station to obtain a 7mm gap between the release lever and the gripper. Another adjustment to the universal pin station ensures that pins will be released to the pin holders at the proper time. Adjust the end of the release lever so that 5mm is showing above. Refer to the service manual for a detailed explanation. If any pins are not spotted correctly, you can adjust the pin holders individually or in rows using the adjustment described in the manual. With the pin holder in the vertical position, check the pin detector plate's vertical clearance by measuring the gap between the plate and the stop bow. This gap should be 5 to 10 millimeters on all 10 pin holders. If it is not, carefully bend the stop bow to the proper gap. On GS92 and earlier pin setters, the horizontal plate adjustment is checked while the table is raised with the pin holders in their horizontal position. If any plate is not level, gently bend it until it is. To adjust the front to back position, you should bend the back tab on the plate's left support bracket to achieve a 3-degree tilt, so the front edge of the plate is 3 degrees lower than the back edge. Check the manual for details. The new style pin detector plate is found on all pin setters after the GS92 and is not adjustable. A 3-degree angle of tilt is built into the design. You must also adjust the detection height of the setting table, with the T-stop resting fully on the stroke limiter plate. A 10 millimeter clearance between the top of the pin and the pin detector plate is necessary. Your manual describes this process. The stroke limiter plate adjustment is checked by manually lowering the table until the stroke limiter T-stop barely touches the stroke limiter plate. There should be a 1 millimeter protrusion of the plate beyond the T-stop. This can be adjusted using the small bolt on the bottom of the limiter's vertical arm. Next, manually press the plunger of the limiter solenoid to check for a 5 millimeter clearance. This adjustment is done by loosening both solenoid mounting screws and positioning the solenoid properly. To check the pin holder switch adjustment, you need to have the pin holders empty and in their horizontal position. Check for a 3 millimeter clearance between the switch spring and the bottom switch finger. If adjustment is needed, carefully bend the rigid metal piece mounted with a switch spring. This style of pin detector plate is only found on GS92 and earlier pin setters. On GS96 and later pin setters, the pin detector plate has an adjusting bolt. The top of this bolt needs to be 12 millimeters away from the surface of the detector plate. Reference your service manual for a detailed description. If there is a problem with scoring, pinfall display, or closing of the tongs, then you must adjust the B switch. If the scoring or pinfall is a problem, loosen and move the B switch toward switch C. If the tongs are not working properly, then the B switch may need to be moved toward the A switch. On GS96 and later pin setters, adjusting the B switch may affect the double loading of the 7 and 10 pin. Please refer to your manual for further details. Holding the pin holders in the horizontal position is a latch hook mounted next to the rear swing shaft. Its release is adjusted by raising the table to its highest position and adjusting the horizontal stop bolt on the rear swing shaft to a 3 millimeter clearance. Now, manually bottom the plunger in the limiter solenoid, causing the latch hook to pull rearward and away from the latch bow, releasing the swing shafts. If a 3 millimeter clearance is not found, adjust the swing lever. If the spotting tongs are not picking up all the pins, the 2 adjustable stops located on the setting table's tong rack may need to be moved to allow complete opening and closing of the tongs. Make sure there are no damaged parts or obstructions interfering with normal movement. If the pin setter CPU senses an out of range when the table lowers to the proper height, the out of range switch needs to be checked. This is done by adjusting the cam on the right-hand table rack to activate the out of range switch as the table lowers. The sweep motor's switch will inform the pin setter CPU when the sweep wagon is all the way forward, with the crank arms and turnbuckles parallel. Adjust the sweep motor switch to the closed position. The switch's actuator should have some free play to avoid damaging the switch. Adjust accordingly. The sweep attenuator adjustment is performed when the sweep is all the way down in the guarding position. The attenuator rests against a stop screw, which should be between the frame and the front of the attenuator. Next, adjust the G switch so it has a small amount of free play while the switch is closed. This will prevent damage to the switch. The sweep wagon rides rearward and forward on guide rollers that are in two guide rails on the pin setter frame. The rollers must be adjusted so the mounting bolts have a minimum clearance of 5 millimeters from the inside wall of the side frame. Adjusting the sweep board height is accomplished by loosening the hex nuts on the bolt attaching the lift chain to the clevis. Raise or lower the bottom of the sweep board assembly to a height of 50 centimeters from the lane surface. While the sweep board is down and fully forward, adjust the gutter adapter to obtain no more than 5 millimeters of clearance. Check to see if the two distributor V-belts have 10 to 15 millimeters of free play and adjust them if necessary. Make sure that both drive motor chains have 5 to 8 millimeters of play and adjust if needed. Adjust the pin elevator chains to eliminate excessive free play. Refer to your service manual for detailed instructions. Check and set the B, C, and D switches for 3 millimeters of clearance between the switch and the magnet. On pin setters with universal electronics, check the 5-volt supply at the input to the game setter box. It must be set to exactly 5.14 volts and is adjusted in the common box. The 5-volt adjustment on pin setters with consolidated electronics is made at R145 on the low-voltage CPU board. The reading is taken at J1 on the top of either of the two low-voltage I/O boards. Connect the meter leads to pins 1 and 2 on the left side of the J1 connector. Adjust the pot at R145 until you obtain 5.14 volts. This completes an overview of the adjustments you will need when servicing the GS Series pin setter. Please review this program and the manual when you perform any of these adjustments, and always follow all safety procedures.